I think my favorite thing about combat in this game is that it's easy to get into, but even more fun to expand on it by learning new tactics and even learning the knowledge on how these work. We've discussed the secrets and stats of combat across many different videos before, but today I want to answer 7 commonly asked yet misunderstood questions that'll help you understand this game's system one step better. The first of which asks about disarming enemies in combat, as it seems after you put in a few combos into them, they sometimes drop their weapons. It's a fortunate event to happen because it makes the rest of the fight a lot easier, and the stats behind this mechanic are actually pretty simple. Each of the 3 major enemies can start to be disarmed after crossing a set threshold in their health bar. For your low tier enemies, red, blue, and green, this can start to happen after they reach a third of their health remaining. For the black tier enemies and the elemental Lizalfos, this starts happening once you reach a quarter health remaining. And all of your silver and gold tier enemies cannot be disarmed this way, so stick with shock or parrying. But in terms of what triggers a disarm for the others, any attack that ragdolls these enemies when past their thresholds will make them drop their weapons. So anything from headshots, sneak strikes, and even finishing a ragdolling combo. These can be done over and over again to disarm an enemy that is past their health threshold. Even if the enemy happens to regen their health after passing the threshold initially, they can still get disarmed over and over until the fight ends. Next, I wanted to cover the hidden resistances and weaknesses of the Molduga, as many people think that bombs and electricity do more damage against them compared to regular attacks. And for these 2 things, the answer is no. Bombs are what uproot a Molduga, but don't actually deal any bonus damage, and electricity also doesn't offer any additional effect when dosed to a normal Molduga. Urbosa's Fury still does a flat 500 damage to them though, which is able to 3-shot its 1500 health, which is the same exact way it works against the Guardian, but that's because every boss takes its own unique damage value to the Fury. The only attack that a Molduga is actually weak to is when struck on the belly, specifically the upper belly, which you may notice has a bigger impact sound and visual effect when struck. Each hit here deals 20% more damage than you would have elsewhere, stackable with any other buff or critical hit. Where Moldugas get really interesting though is with their top of the chain ruler, the Moldu King, which actually does have a lot of strengths and weaknesses at play. If you try wailing on one with a powerful weapon, you'll see that it has a ton of health compared to their normal counterparts. Well, it does seem that way, but the King actually only has 1600 HP, which is only 100 more than a normal Molduga. So why do powerful weapons feel so weak against them? Well, the Moldu King is the only repeatable enemy in the game to have its own damage reduction multiplier, which decreases all player damage by 80%, internally multiplying your damage output by 0.2. So an upgraded Master Sword, which usually deals 60 damage, will now deal a mere 12. It's got some really thick skin. Fortunately, this thick skin is made out of a lot of metal, which if overcome by using an attack charged with electricity, it will exponentially multiply the value of the attack by 7.5 times. This is where the electricity weakness finally comes into play. So if we attack it with a Thunder Spear, which deals 22 base damage, first the reduction multiplier of 0.2 gets applied to reduce the number to 4.4, which is rounded down to 4. Then the electricity multiplier of 7.5 gets applied to create a final damage output of 30, which is ultimately an alright step up from the 22 base, but certainly much better than a non-electric weapon of the same caliber. Probably the best weapon to apply this with would be a 5-shot Lionel Bow with shock arrows, as each base arrow of 32 will be changed to 45 after calculations, which is further stackable with belly criticals and attack up, creating potentially an 80 damage shot 5 times to create a 400 damage volley every shot. Which is very good, but still doesn't beat the nice and fixed Urbosa's Fury, which can still deal 500 a pop to the King, nearly 3-shotting it, so still the best way. The only other special health value a Moldu King has is related to one specific action of his, when he swallows a player's blue Sheikah bomb and it's detonated, as this deals the full value of the bomb rather than the reduced value as if it was just thrown regularly, which makes sense as the armor is just on the outside. But on the subject of resistances, not many other enemies in the game have these, but there is a very noticeable one when it comes to the Guardians and bombs specifically. If you ever tried throwing bombs at Guardians on the plateau when you first started your game, you would see that this doesn't work very well. Remote bombs usually deal 12 damage or 24 when upgraded, but against any Guardian type enemy, they only deal 1 damage and 2 damage respectively. This is because all big Guardian types have an explosion resistance multiplier of 0.1, so a bomb will only deal 10% of its full damage to them, which after the rounding down explains the low damages. The bomb arrows, of course, also get this reduction, where their 40 damage explosions are reduced to a mere 4 per hit. And similarly enough, all the blights and Ganon also have their own bomb resistance multiplier, but this time of 0.8, or a 20% reduction, which isn't as bad, but still apparent. The blights and Ganon also have a few other odd quirks too, such as wind blights and water blights taking 50% less headshot damage, along with the Master Sword beams dealing 60 damage to them instead of the base 20. The blights actually have a ton of depth and details to them when it comes to different stats. And to see more of that, I recommend checking out the blight stats video we made that covers pretty much everything revolving around them and Ganon. It was a super interesting research and worth the watch. But for this next section, I really want to dive into the elemental related questions, specifically starting with how elemental effects work against damaging enemies versus how they work against the player. This is going to be a slight retcon from how the system was previously thought to be. So the damage values of elementals are not treated one-to-one from enemy to player, so let's compare them side by side. For fire elementals, an enemy takes 10 points of damage upon being lit, on top of whatever base weapon damage. And against the player, they only take 6 points of damage upon being lit, aka a heart and a half, on top of the enemy's physical damage output. While actively burning in a flame though, an enemy takes 35 damage per second, while the player only takes 2 per second, half a heart at a time. For the ice elementals, an enemy takes 10 points of damage when frozen, the same damage as fire, but against the player, they only take 2 damage for being frozen in ice. And when shattered out, an enemy gets critical hit for 3 times the normal damage of the player's weapon, and when the player is shattered out, they are only critical hit for 2 times the normal damage. Right now it's seeming like the player has it easier, but this is mainly due to the drastic health difference between players and enemies, as Link only starts out with 12 HP, aka 3 hearts, and maxes at 120 HP, aka 30 hearts, while elemental affected enemies can have hundreds if not over 1,000 health. So under that context, it's a lot more fair. But next is the Shock Elemental, which hurts enemies for 20 damage when electrocuted, while doing only 12 damage to the player. But for the Shock Orb attack, when shock hits metal or water, these orbs will hurt enemies for 40 damage, which is double the normal value, and for Link they'll hurt him for 8 damage, 2/3 of the normal value. This also includes the Electrical Zolfos Orb attack, which works the same way. A key reminder that elementals can only affect certain non-boss enemy types, and a player can block these effects with the right elemental resistance. The only final elemental to discuss, which really isn't an elemental but is still special in a similar way, are the bomb arrows, specifically with how they work upon affecting the player. We discussed previously that when a player uses them, they have 3 damaging parts: the 40 damage explosion, 10 fire damage, and miscellaneous burning. But if you want to learn more about that, feel free to check out the carded video in the top right. What we didn't discuss though was how bomb arrows affect the player, as this is truly bizarre. So if a player is caught in the blast of a bomb arrow, it will deal 46 damage, 40 being the standard familiar explosion value, and 6 being the fire, because as we discussed, fire elementals damage the player for 6 damage. However, if the bomb arrow shot connects with the player, here's where things get really odd, because you would expect the base damage of the arrow to add with the explosion and fire. But logic deceives the actual calculation, because when shot by an enemy with a bomb arrow, it only counts the damage of that base arrow shot, while the actual explosion and fire damage is studded to 0, despite the player's blowback. So this blue bokoblin, who can output 28 damage with a normal arrow, also just deals 28 damage when hitting the player with the bomb arrow dead on. This means that getting shot directly with the bomb arrow in some cases deals less damage than just being caught in the blast of one, which is kind of a silly calculation in my eyes. Interesting. But all this gets even wilder when talking about multi-shot bows, because multi-shot bows have a 0.6 bomb damage multiplier reduction, turning each individual arrow from 40 to 24 damage, aka the multi-shot bomb nerf. So this can get all potentially lower as well. It doesn't matter if you get hit with 1 arrow, 3, or a max 5. As we all know, Link can only take damage once at a time and can't be damaged after just getting hits or ragdolled. So the only main benefit of an enemy having multiple arrows instead of 1 is the chances of you getting hit with its spread. But finally, how can we wrap up the talk about all the elemental weirdness without discussing the final weird quirks about elementals, specifically with the rods? Well, we've seen elementals act out a character before, specifically with the Molduging's 7.5 damage multiplier when hit with electrical attacks, compared to how electricity works normally. But the other big culprit to these are the rods, so let's discuss actually how these things work. First, do you see the attack number on the rod? This number only refers to the damage outputs when a rod directly smacks into an enemy, which you want to avoid in the first place as it chews up a durability point on top of the durability of conjuring an elemental attack. So the attack modifier you can get on these only increases the damage of direct contact, making it nearly a useless modifier in lieu of what rods are actually good for. It's about as useful as long throw, which we don't like. This aside though, these rods obviously distribute through respective elemental blasts, but the damage stats of them are actually different and unique compared to the others that we discussed, and is the same regardless of hitting an enemy or the player. For any of the base tier rods, fire, ice, and lightning, every attack will deal 10 damage, regardless if it's an enemy or the player. It's just the main damage stat for the base rods. The secondary effects such as shattering an enemy after freezing or using shock to make electric orbs still holds the previous rules though, so the rods didn't change anything there. For the higher tier rods though, Meteor, Blizzard, and Thunder, these ones are a lot different, as each one has their own unique stats that we need to discuss separately. For Meteor, it shoots 3 fireballs, but each of these deal 20 damage instead of 10. Usually, you can't apply the same elemental damage to an enemy while they're still experiencing that elemental effect, but this rule doesn't apply to the fireballs as they can stack with each other, although occasionally one may dud out in rapid succession. The Blizzard Rod is a lot more straightforward, as anyone caught in a blizzard will get hurt for 30 damage, but lastly and most interestingly is the Thunder Rod, which shoots 3 electric orbs in a straight formation, with each ball dealing 30 damage. And like the fireballs, multiple can apply to the same enemy at once. Now where this does get weird though is with the orb attack when hitting water or metal, as instead of being normal like the lightning rod, each of the orbs only affect an enemy for 20 damage instead of 40. Of course the orbs can affect multiple times at once, just like they do for any other orb against an enemy, but the weird thing about this rod is that the center shock ball doesn't create an orb when hitting the right surface, only the 2 end ones do. So at its most, you can only deal the same orb damage as a standard lightning rod, so you're better off just using a multi-shot shock bow if orbs are your goal. Oh yeah, and these thunder rods don't work against the Molduga either, sorry. But anyways, that was the 7 in-depth combat stat topics I have to discuss in the video, and I hope you found it interesting and useful. There's going to be more things to share in terms of variety topics like this moving forward, but for some good videos relating to the topics discussed today, the blight stats, explosion stats, and elemental stats videos all discuss similar topics to this today that weren't discussed in the video. Those will be linked below. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching this episode in Stats of the Wild. Stay tuned for more of this and Stats of the Kingdom in the future, and I'll see you all in the next time. Goodbye!